From Dar es Salaam to the fishing towns of Lake Victoria, radios hummed with patriotic songs that had played since dawn. Election day was meant to be a celebration, a moment when 37 million registered voters would decide the country's direction. Posters of the ruling party, Chama Cha Mapinduzi, CCM, hung from every pole, the face of President Samia Suluhu Hassan smiling beneath the party's green and yellow banner. The state media called it a festival of democracy. For many, it felt more like a test of faith. Polling stations opened at sunrise. In coastal villages, voters arrived in their best clothes, queuing quietly beneath palm trees. In the cities, the lines stretched around schools and community halls. Election officials checked identification cards, dipped fingers in indelible ink, and ushered voters toward the plastic ballot boxes. Cameras from national television framed the day as orderly, peaceful, exemplary. But outside the frame, stories began to differ. Observers from local NGOs complained that some stations opened late or lacked opposition agents. Others reported military trucks parked within sight of polling centers, a subtle reminder of who truly watched over the process. When opposition figures protested, police escorted them away, citing security concerns. Still, hope persisted. Many citizens, teachers, drivers, students, spoke of duty rather than trust. "We must vote," said Rehema, a university student in Morogoro. "It's the only power we have left." Across social media, Tanzanians posted selfies with inked fingers, tagging them with slogans of unity. Even critics of the government allowed a flicker of optimism. "Maybe," one wrote, "this time our voices will count." By evening, the mood shifted. Reports surfaced that opposition strongholds were closing early. Internet speeds slowed noticeably. WhatsApp calls failed. In Arusha, journalists trying to livestream polling queues saw their feeds cut mid-sentence. The blackout began quietly, a flicker here, a silence there, and then spread nationwide. At 8 p.m., the National Electoral Commission announced preliminary figures, turnout above 87%, early counts showing CCM leading by overwhelming margins. Opposition parties dismissed the numbers as impossible. Their observers claimed to have been denied entry to counting rooms. "No transparency, no tally sheets," said one campaign manager by phone before his line dropped. By midnight, the internet was almost gone. Only state television remained, broadcasting a continuous reel of songs, patriotic slogans, and smiling voters. In Zanzibar, rumors of arrests circulated. In Mwanza, people gathered near closed shops, whispering what they'd heard through shortwave radios. Then, at 2 a.m., the declaration came. President Samia Suluhu Hassan, the incumbent, had won 98% of the vote. For a moment, the country froze. The figure was so high that even loyalists blinked in disbelief. Analysts later recalled that such margins belonged to another era, to leaders who equated power with permanence. Yet on state TV, the anchor smiled and said simply, "The people have spoken." In some neighborhoods, fireworks burst into the night. Supporters cheered, chanting "Mama Samia forever." But elsewhere, silence settled like dust. Power outages rolled across districts, curfews were announced to maintain order. The illusion of calm shattered. By dawn, the first videos leaked through virtual private networks, protesters confronting police in Dar es Salaam, smoke rising from Shinyanga, crowds scattering as shots rang out. In the footage, voices trembled, some shouting for democracy, others for safety. "They are shooting," one man cried before the screen went black. Hospitals in Morogoro and Arusha reported a surge of casualties. Doctors, speaking anonymously, described gunshot wounds and tear gas exposure. Officially, the Ministry of Information labeled the images fabrications by foreign agents. Yet, eyewitness accounts grew harder to suppress. Families searched morgues. Journalists vanished. The blackout deepened. International networks tried to verify events through satellite phones. An editor from Nairobi explained later, "It was like talking to a country behind a curtain. No data, no calls, just rumors and fear." By the second night, barricades appeared on major roads. In some towns, young men overturned government vehicles. In others, security forces patrolled in armored trucks. Religious leaders urged calm, broadcasting prayers from darkened mosques and churches. "We must pray for peace," said one bishop in a radio address that barely reached its audience. But peace cannot exist without truth. Analysts watching from abroad struggled to make sense of the speed. Tanzania, long considered one of East Africa's most stable nations, had become unrecognizable overnight. The same streets that once hosted marathons and markets now echoed with sirens. Yet the government insisted all was normal. A spokesperson announced that isolated incidents of unrest had been contained. State newspapers carried front-page photographs of the president waving to supporters, accompanied by headlines such as "Victory of the People." Beneath them, short articles dismissed foreign media reports as anti-Tanzanian propaganda. For ordinary citizens, daily life collapsed into uncertainty. Fuel stations ran out of supplies as trucks halted under the curfew. Markets closed. In the capital, parents kept children indoors, uncertain what might happen next. "It's like waiting for a storm we cannot see," one shopkeeper said. Outside observers could measure the blackout's impact through fragments, spikes in VPN traffic, satellite images showing fires in several city centers, social media posts uploaded from neighboring Kenya by exiled activists. Those fragments painted a grim picture, one of a nation sliding from order into repression with alarming precision. And yet, beneath the fear, a quieter truth persisted. Tanzanians still believed in democracy, not as a slogan, but as a right they had glimpsed and were unwilling to surrender.
The steps we take now will define our future. I am confident that we have the strength and determination to succeed.
In whispered conversations and hidden text messages, they repeated a single question. What truly happened to our vote? By the third day after the election, Tanzania was enveloped in a silence that spoke louder than any voice. The initial shock of the 98% victory had settled into a steady rhythm of fear, punctuated by sporadic gunfire, sirens, and distant explosions. Streets once alive with commerce now lay deserted. Barricades of burning tires blocked intersections in Dar es Salaam, Mwanza, and Morogoro. Shops shuttered, schools remained closed, and the hum of generators replaced the usual chatter of the marketplace. For ordinary citizens, the reality was immediate and personal. Fatma, a university student in Dar es Salaam, spent the night searching for her younger brother, a volunteer for an opposition campaign. Every knock at the door, every siren, filled her with dread. When she finally reached a relative who had fled to a neighboring village, she learned that he had been detained by security forces the night before. Fatma's story mirrored countless others: families separated, communities silenced. Hospitals were the next lens into the unfolding crisis. Doctors described emergency rooms flooded with victims of violence. Tear gas inhalation, blunt force trauma, and gunshot wounds were commonplace. One physician, speaking anonymously, recounted, "We are treating bodies faster than we can count them. Some arrive unidentified, families are afraid to claim them. The hospitals are under orders not to release numbers. Even our reports to NGOs are delayed or blocked." Government statements claimed that the hospitals were operating normally, but the testimonies of medical staff told a different story, a story of overwhelmed facilities and fear-laden staff. Communication blackouts intensified the sense of isolation. Internet connections were disrupted across the country, mobile networks were unreliable, and international journalists faced extreme difficulty transmitting reports. The information vacuum allowed rumors to flourish. Whispers of mass detentions, secret trials, and extrajudicial killings circulated alongside stories of courage, citizens documenting abuses through improvised channels, often at great personal risk. Amid this chaos, the government maintained a narrative of stability. State-controlled media broadcast images of celebrations, framing the unrest as minor, localized disturbances amplified by foreign propaganda. Security forces were portrayed as protectors of democracy and order, their actions justified as necessary to maintain peace and protect citizens. Yet, eyewitness accounts, independent reports, and leaked videos presented a starkly different reality. Streets were littered with debris from clashes, armored vehicles patrolled residential areas, uniformed officers stood outside polling stations and municipal buildings, weapons at the ready. The analytical layer of the crisis began to reveal itself through historical context. Tanzania's ruling party, Chama cha Mapinduzi, has been in power since the country's independence in 1961, first as the Tanganyika African National Union and then as CCM following the merger with Zanzibar's Afro-Shirazi Party. The party's longevity has been supported by a combination of popular legitimacy, state machinery, and an entrenched political culture. Elections have historically been controlled, with opposition parties often constrained in their ability to campaign freely. While CCM has maintained stability and economic growth, critics argue that its dominance has often come at the expense of political pluralism and democratic transparency. The events following the election were consistent with this pattern. Analysts observed that CCM's control over the judiciary, police, and electoral commissions created an environment in which dissent could be swiftly suppressed. Opposition leaders faced arrests, intimidation, or exile. Journalists critical of the government risked detention, and civil society organizations struggled to operate under surveillance. The blackout of information was part of a broader strategy to manage public perception and maintain authority. Yet, beneath these measures, the responses of ordinary citizens revealed a different truth. In the coastal city of Tanga, residents formed small, clandestine discussion groups to share information about missing persons and government actions. In Mwanza, young activists circulated handwritten pamphlets highlighting irregularities in voting and counting procedures. The resilience of civil society, even under severe restrictions, underscored a persistent demand for accountability and transparency. Economic consequences began to appear rapidly. Markets in urban centers struggled as transport routes were blocked, fuel shortages emerged, and essential goods became scarce. Bread, cooking oil, and other staples reached inflated prices. Informal laborers, who relied on daily income from street markets, found themselves unable to earn a living. The curfew not only restricted movement but also disrupted livelihoods, creating an additional layer of social strain. For many families, survival became immediate, pressing, and terrifyingly uncertain. The human stories added texture to the broader analytical picture. In Morogoro, a shopkeeper recounted the night when security forces arrived to enforce the curfew. They knocked on doors, asking questions about our movements and whether we had photographs of protests, he said. Some neighbors were taken away. We closed our shop and stayed inside for 3 nights straight. It felt like life had paused. Across the country, similar narratives emerged. Ordinary Tanzanians caught between loyalty, fear, and the instinct for self-preservation. The crackdown was not uniform. In some rural areas, the authorities faced less resistance, and life continued with relative normalcy. Yet even there, the pervasive climate of fear influenced behavior. Teachers cancelled lessons, local councils postponed community meetings, residents avoided public gatherings, wary of drawing unwanted attention. In every region, the interplay between state power and citizen response highlighted the fragility of democratic institutions in the face of entrenched political authority. From a historical perspective, CCM's dominance has relied not only on institutional control but also on narrative control. The party's ability to frame events, to define what constitutes order, and to marginalize dissent has been a key strategy for maintaining legitimacy. During this crisis, the combination of blackout measures, curated media coverage, and rapid deployment of security forces illustrated a continuation of this strategy. At the same time, modern technology, encrypted messaging apps, satellite feeds, and diaspora networks offered alternative avenues for information to emerge, challenging the monopoly of state narratives. Observers from international organizations, including the United Nations and Amnesty International, attempted to assess the situation remotely. Statements expressed concern over reports of violence, intimidation, and disruption of civil liberties.
The steps we take now will define our future. I am confident that we have the strength and determination to succeed.
The European Union called for transparency, while the African Union adopted a cautious stance, emphasizing dialogue and restraint. In contrast, global powers with strategic interests in Tanzania, such as China, publicly congratulated President Hassan, citing her leadership as a stabilizing force. These reactions highlighted the tension between political pragmatism, human rights advocacy, and regional diplomacy, a tension that would shape international engagement in the weeks and months to follow. Within the country, citizens began to adapt to the new normal of uncertainty. Families coordinated schedules to avoid curfew violations. Students used handwritten notes and offline communications to continue academic work. Communities organized informal support systems to share food and monitor safety. These adaptive behaviors reflected a resilient social fabric, yet they also emphasized the pervasive intrusion of the state into everyday life. Privacy, freedom of movement, and civic autonomy had become negotiable, contingent on the tolerance of authorities. As the second week after the election progressed, the first evidence of lasting damage became apparent. Civil liberties, already constrained, were further eroded. The ability to organize, protest, or even discuss politics openly was limited. Meanwhile, the government continued to frame the events in a language of order and patriotism, reinforcing loyalty while discouraging dissent. This dual reality, one of lived oppression versus public narrative, encapsulated the central tension of the crisis. The early stages of analysis suggested that the crisis in Tanzania was not merely a reaction to a contested election, but a reflection of deeper systemic issues. CCM's long-standing control, the absence of robust independent institutions, and the political culture of centralization created conditions where rapid escalation of violence and suppression was possible. Yet, within these constraints, citizens displayed agency, resourcefulness, and courage, challenging simplistic portrayals of passivity or acquiescence. The nation existed in a suspended state, caught between official narratives of triumph and the stark reality of disrupted lives. Streets emptied by curfew, hospitals overwhelmed, markets unstable, and families in fear, the country had moved from the illusion of calm to a tangible, pervasive darkness. And yet, even in this environment, the question persisted: how would Tanzanians, and the world, respond to the unfolding challenge of democracy under siege? As Tanzania grappled with the immediate consequences of election day chaos, the country's turbulence began to reverberate far beyond its borders. Regional leaders, international organizations, and foreign governments watched closely, weighing statements, responses, and potential interventions with caution. The events were no longer purely a domestic matter. Tanzania's role as East Africa's economic and political anchor made every development consequential for the region and beyond. The African Union, historically cautious in matters of member state sovereignty, issued a brief statement urging restraint and dialogue. The organization emphasized the importance of upholding the constitution and encouraged all parties to respect the rights of citizens. Yet, the AU's language was measured, avoiding explicit criticism of the government. Observers noted that the Union's neutrality reflected both political pragmatism and a desire to maintain unity among member states, particularly as Tanzania has long been considered a stabilizing force in regional security and trade. Meanwhile, the United Nations released a more pointed statement. Through its Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, it expressed concern over reports of excessive use of force, arbitrary arrests, and the suppression of civil liberties. UN human rights experts called for unimpeded access to affected areas and transparency in the release of casualty figures. Behind the public statements, diplomatic channels worked quietly. Envoys from the UN and other international bodies attempted to negotiate with Tanzanian authorities, seeking clarity on the extent of violence and the government's next steps. The European Union responded with a similar blend of caution and critique. Brussels demanded transparency in the electoral process, specifically calling for independent audits of voting results and accountability for abuses against journalists and citizens. The EU's position underscored a recurring tension in international diplomacy: the balance between promoting democratic principles and maintaining pragmatic relations with a nation critical to regional trade, infrastructure projects, and migration management. Other global powers reacted differently. China, a long-standing economic partner of Tanzania, congratulated President Hassan on her victory, framing her leadership as a pillar of stability and reaffirming Beijing's commitment to continued cooperation in infrastructure, mining, and trade. In contrast, the United States and its allies expressed concern over the violent suppression of dissent, emphasizing the need for transparency, human rights protections, and adherence to democratic norms. Yet, these critiques were tempered by considerations of strategic interest. Tanzania's position along the Indian Ocean, its port facilities in Dar es Salaam and Mtwara, and its role in regional energy and mineral markets made full-scale intervention unlikely. Tanzania's economic significance amplified international interest. The country sits atop rich deposits of gold, diamonds, and other minerals critical to both industrial and technological markets. It is a regional hub for trade and logistics, hosting ports that serve landlocked neighbors such as Zambia, Rwanda, and Burundi. The government's ability to maintain perceived stability, even at the cost of democratic processes, carries profound implications. Disruptions could affect regional commerce, investment flows, and development projects. Analysts argued that foreign responses were thus guided as much by economics as by principles of governance. Economic considerations were not limited to global powers. African neighbors monitored the situation carefully. Kenya, Uganda, and Rwanda faced direct implications. Cross-border trade routes were interrupted, supply chains disrupted, and political movements in Tanzania could embolden domestic opposition groups. For regional markets, the violence and curfew-imposed paralysis raised fears of inflation, shortages of essential commodities, and currency volatility. The ripple effects of Tanzania's internal crisis were tangible within days, signaling that the stakes extended beyond its population of 60 million. Experts in governance and East African politics offered further perspective. Dr. Amina Mando, a political scientist based in Dar es Salaam, observed, "Tanzania has historically balanced governance with stability, but this election demonstrates the fragility of that balance. The government's response reveals the extent to which political control is centralized. While the public desires democratic engagement, institutions that should mediate conflict, courts, electoral commissions, civil society, are constrained. Security analysts highlighted the duality of Tanzania's situation. On one hand, CCM's entrenched structures, disciplined security forces, and centralized authority enabled rapid control over unrest. On the other hand, these same measures risked long-term legitimacy. Professor Samuel Kibet of Nairobi University commented, "Authoritarian enforcement may secure short-term order, but it undermines confidence in institutions. Regional stability relies not only on borders and economics, but on predictable, accountable governance." The interplay between internal political culture and external observation became increasingly evident. Satellite imagery confirmed fires in urban centers, satellite phone interviews with local residents described arbitrary detentions, diaspora networks amplified stories of repression. In this environment, information became a contested commodity. Governments and citizens alike faced challenges in discerning fact from rumor. The vacuum created by the blackout intensified international anxiety. Each fragment of verified information carried disproportionate weight in shaping diplomatic decisions. Tanzania's mineral wealth also intersected with political calculations. Gold exports alone contribute significantly to government revenues and foreign exchange. Strategic infrastructure projects, ports, railways, and energy grids depended on perceived stability. Analysts suggested that global powers' cautious engagement reflected both economic self-interest and concern for regional influence.